Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at these sources you sent over about the intersection of psychology and Buddhism, and specifically how that relates to the path of awakening and personal growth and healing in the context of relationships.
Yeah, I think what's really fascinating about these sources is the way they challenge some of the conventional wisdom around personal growth. They really invite us to kind of question some of our basic assumptions about who we are and how we heal and how we connect more deeply with ourselves and others.
Absolutely. The whole idea of the fabricated self really jumped out at me.
Hmm.
What exactly does that mean, and why should we even care?
Yeah, well, when you think about it, our sense of self is often a construct, right? It's built from all these external influences. Our upbringing, societal expectations, past relationships, all of these things kind of come together and we create this image of ourselves, this fabricated self, and we end up clinging to that. And that clinging can actually lead to a lot of suffering because we're constantly trying to maintain this image of ourselves that may not really be authentic.
So rather than actually growing and evolving, we're stuck trying to maintain this image that isn't really real.
Exactly. And when that image starts to crumble, as it inevitably does, it can feel like our whole world is falling apart. And that's what some of these sources refer to as world collapse. And it could be a pretty intense experience.
Yeah, it sounds terrifying. Is it always a bad thing?
Well, it certainly doesn't feel good. But the Buddhist perspective actually offers a different take on this. It suggests that world collapse, while challenging, can also be a doorway to awakening. So it's kind of like when the structures that we've built around our sense of self crumble, we actually have an opportunity to see things more clearly without all those filters and defenses.
So it's a chance to kind of start fresh, to build a new sense of self that's more in alignment with our true nature.
Exactly. And that new sense of self, according to these sources, is rooted in unconditional presence. It's about learning to be present with our experience as it is, without judgment, without the need to fix anything.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these concepts kind of all fit together, but how do we actually cultivate unconditional presence? I mean, it sounds kind of abstract.
Yeah, well, one way is to simply notice the tendency to cling to the fabricated self. So, when you're feeling anxious or insecure, just pause for a moment and ask yourself, what part of me is feeling threatened right now? Is it my authentic self? Or is it this constricted image that I'm holding on to?
So it's about becoming aware of the stories that we're telling ourselves about who we are.
Exactly. And as we become more aware of those stories, we can start to loosen their grip on us. And that's where the idea of making friends with our emotions comes in.
One of the sources described emotions as being like waves.
Mm.
And that we often try to resist those waves, which only makes them stronger. But if we can learn to kind of ride those waves, to experience them without judgment, then we can navigate them more skillfully. Is that what's meant by making friends with our emotions?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that emotions, even the difficult ones, are simply energy moving through us. They're not our enemies. They're actually valuable messengers trying to tell us something important.
So instead of trying to suppress them, we should try to understand them.
Exactly. When we open to our emotions with curiosity and compassion, we can learn a lot about ourselves and what we need.
That makes sense. But does that not require a certain level of vulnerability? I mean, opening up to our emotions, especially the painful ones, can feel pretty scary.
It can, but that's where the real growth happens. Vulnerability, often seen as a weakness, is actually a source of strength and connection. Think of it like water. Water is soft and yielding, yet it can wear down even the hardest rock.
So it's about allowing ourselves to be seen, imperfections and all.
Exactly. And one of the excerpts that you shared, the story about Ray, very highlights this point. He was so afraid to show his vulnerability because he thought it made him weak. But through therapy, he learned to embrace those parts of himself and discovered a deeper level of connection with himself and others.
That's a great example of how facing our vulnerability can actually lead to something much deeper and more meaningful. But how does this all play out in our relationships? I mean, they can be pretty challenging, to say the least.
Oh, absolutely. And that's actually what makes them such a powerful path of awakening. Relationships, with all their complexities and contradictions, offer us a unique opportunity to really put these concepts into practice.
So it's not about finding a relationship that's free from conflict.
No, conflict is inevitable. In fact, the challenges and frictions that we face in relationships can actually illuminate our unconscious patterns and help us to grow in ways that we never imagined.
So it's more about learning to navigate those challenges skillfully.
Exactly. Think of it like a dance. A relationship is a constant dance between holding on and letting go, between closeness and space.
I love that analogy. But how do we learn to dance that dance more skillfully, especially when things get heated?
Well, that's where the concepts we've been discussing come into play. Unconditional presence helps us to stay grounded and centered amidst the storms of relationship. Vulnerability allows us to express our needs and fears authentically, which fosters deeper connection. And making friends with our emotions helps us to respond to conflict with wisdom and compassion rather than reactivity.
So instead of avoiding conflict, we should actually see it as an opportunity for growth and deeper intimacy.
Exactly. It's about learning to work with the challenges and contradictions that are inherent in being human.
It sounds like there's a lot to unpack there.
There is, and that's where things get really interesting.
I knew you were going to say that.
But before we dive deeper into the dynamics of conscious relationships, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've covered so far. What stands out to you?
I'm really struck by the idea that world collapse, while painful, can actually be a catalyst for positive change. It's like we have to let go of the old, outdated version of ourselves in order to make space for something new to emerge.
That's a beautiful insight. And it's a reminder that growth and transformation often involve a certain amount of discomfort. But on the other side of that discomfort lies a deeper level of authenticity and freedom.
I'm also really intrigued by this idea of making friends with emotions. It seems like that's a key to navigating relationships and life in general with more grace and ease.
It is, and it's a practice, something we have to cultivate over time. But as we learn to relate to our emotions in a more skillful way, we become less reactive and more resilient.
So instead of being tossed around by our emotions, we learn to ride those waves with more awareness and presence.
Exactly. And that's a powerful place to be, both in our relationships and in our lives as a whole.
This has been a great start to our deep dive. I'm excited to explore these ideas further and see how they can help us cultivate more conscious and fulfilling relationships.
Me too. In part 2, we'll delve into the distinctions between spiritual work and soul work, and we'll explore how they relate to the journey of conscious relationship.
So in part 1, we talked about the fabricative self and world collapse and making friends with our emotions. And I'm really curious to kind of dive a little deeper into this whole idea of soul that keeps popping up in these sources. What does it actually mean, especially in the context of relationships?
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept, isn't it? And one that's often shrouded in mystery. But John Welwood, in the materials you shared, he offers a perspective that I think is particularly insightful. He suggests that soul isn't so much a fixed thing, but rather a dynamic process, a way of describing how our true nature unfolds in our lives.
Okay, so it's less about having a soul and more about the soul being expressed through us.
Exactly. It's the unique way that our individual essence, that spark of the divine, kind of manifests in the world. And what's really interesting is that Welwood draws a distinction between spiritual work and soul work.
I noticed that in the excerpts. Can you elaborate on the difference between the two?
Yeah, sure. So spiritual work in its purest form is about awakening to our true nature, that boundless awareness that exists beyond all limitations. It's about realizing that we're not just these separate, isolated egos, but something much vaster and more interconnected.
So it's about transcending the limitations of the fabricated self.
Yes, exactly. But soul work takes things a step further. It's about integrating that spiritual realization into our everyday lives, bringing that expansive awareness into our relationships, our work, our creative endeavors, all the messy details of being human.
And that's where conscious relationships come into play, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Relationships become the training ground for soul work. They challenge us to bridge the gap between the spiritual and the personal, between our absolute nature and our conditioned ego.
That sounds like a pretty tall order.
It is, and it's not always easy. It requires a willingness to face our shadow side, all those unconscious patterns and defenses that we've built up over a lifetime.
The stuff we try to hide even from ourselves.
Yes, and often those hidden parts are what create the most conflict in our relationship. They're like landmines waiting to be triggered.
And when they explode, it can be pretty messy.
It certainly can, but it can also be a powerful opportunity for healing and growth. If we can learn to meet those explosions in awareness and compassion, to see them as opportunity to learn and evolve, then the relationship becomes a crucible for transformation.
So it's not about avoiding conflict, but about learning to engage with it in a more conscious way.
Exactly. Soul work in relationships is about befriending our demons, integrating our shadow, and becoming whole. It's about learning to love all parts of ourselves, even the messy, imperfect bits. And that kind of radical self-acceptance is essential for truly conscious relating.
Because when we can embrace our own wholeness, we're more able to embrace the wholeness of our partner.
Precisely. And we're less likely to project our own unowned shadow onto them, which can create so much unnecessary drama. But when two people are committed to doing their own soul work, the relationship becomes something much greater than just romantic love. It becomes a path of awakening, a shared journey of growth and evolution.
I love that. It's like the relationship becomes a container for something sacred, a space where two souls can meet and support each other on their journey.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And speaking of the sacred, there's a quote from Welwood's conversation with Paul Chappie that really resonated with me. He says, "Community is born in the relationship between I and thou."
Hmm, that's profound. What do you think he means by that?
I think it speaks to the transformative power of conscious relationships. It suggests that these intimate connections have the potential to ripple outwards, creating a more loving, connected, and soulful world. It starts with two people choosing to relate consciously, to bring their full presence and awareness to their interactions. And as they do that, it creates a ripple effect that extends beyond the relationship itself, impact at their families, their communities, and ultimately the world.
It feels so hopeful, especially in times like these when there's so much division and turmoil in the world. It's a reminder that even small acts of love and awareness can make a difference.
Absolutely. Each conscious relationship becomes like a beacon of light, illuminating the path for others.
Okay, so we've explored the concept of soul as this dynamic process of integrating our true nature into our lives, and we've seen how conscious relationships can serve as a fertile ground for this kind of soul work. But what about the practicalities? How do we actually do this work? Where do we even begin?
Well, Welwood emphasizes the importance of understanding the difference between states and stations when it comes to love and presence.
I was hoping we could unpack that a bit more. I get the general idea, but I'd love to hear your take on what those terms mean in the context of relationships.
Of course, it's a subtle distinction, but a really important one. States refer to those temporary experiences of love and presence that we all have from time to time. They're those moments when we feel deeply connected to our partner, when everything feels aligned and in flow.
Like when you first fall in love and everything feels magical.
Exactly. Or those moments of deep intimacy and understanding that can arise even in long-term relationships. But the thing about states is that they're fleeting. They come and go, and often we find ourselves clinging to those states, trying to hold on to them, which only creates suffering when they inevitably fade.
Because we start to believe that that's how it should be all the time.
Yes, and then we feel disappointed or frustrated when it's not. But stations, on the other hand, are more stable and enduring. They represent a deeper level of immigration, where those qualities of love and presence become more embodied, more woven into the fabric of our being.
So it's less about having peak experiences and more about cultivating a consistent baseline of awareness and connection.
Exactly. And that's where the real work of conscious relationship lies. It's about showing up consistently, even when it's difficult, even when we're triggered, even when we'd rather run and hide.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And one of the things that Welwood highlights is that the challenges and conflicts we face in relationships can actually help us move from those fleeting states to more stable stations.
So instead of seeing conflict as a sign that something's wrong, we should see it as an opportunity to deepen our connection.
Yes, it's like the friction between two stones creates a spark. The challenges we encounter in relationships can help us burn away our impurities and reveal our true gold. They can help us crack open our hearts and discover a deeper capacity for love and compassion.
But that friction can be painful.
It can, but it's important to remember that pain isn't the enemy. In fact, Welwood suggests that the pain of love can be a powerful catalyst for awakening. He quotes the Sufi master Hazrat Inayat Khan, who said, "The pain of love is the dynamite that breaks open the heart, even if it be as hard as a rock."
Wow, that's a powerful image.
It is. It suggests that the challenges we face in relationships, if we meet them with awareness and compassion, can actually help us break free from the prison of our own limitations. They can help us discover a deeper level of love and wisdom that we never knew we had.
This is all really resonating with me. It feels like we're moving beyond the superficial understanding of love and relationships and getting into something much deeper and more profound.
That's exactly what soul work is all about. It's about transforming our pain into wisdom, using it to fuel our growth and evolution. And conscious relationships provide the perfect container for this kind of alchemy.
Because they offer a constant opportunity to practice presence, compassion, and forgiveness.
Yes. And to learn to dance with the polarities of life, to embrace the fullness of our experience, the light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow, and to discover the boundless love and wisdom that reside within us all.
This has been such a rich exploration. It feels like all these concepts we've been discussing, the fabricated self-world, collapse, making friends of emotions, the dance of relationship, they're all pointing towards a deeper embodiment of our true nature.
They are. And as we start to embody that truth, it naturally spills over into our relationships and begins to create a more conscious and awakened world.
Before we move on to part three, is there anything else from this section that really stands out to you?
What I find so compelling is the idea that we're not alone in this journey. We have each other. And through conscious relationship, we can support and inspire each other to awaken to our fullest potential.
I love that. It's a reminder that love is not just a personal experience, but a powerful force for collective transformation. Okay, so let's take a short break, and in part three, we'll explore how this work of conscious love can actually help us create a more soulful and awakened world. Stay tuned. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive, and we're talking about how this idea of conscious love can actually kind of ripple outward and contribute to a more soulful and awakened world. It's a pretty big idea, right?
It is a big idea, but I think it's one worth exploring, especially, given the state of the world today. There's so much division and conflict happening, on a global scale. It can feel overwhelming sometimes.
Totally. And amidst all that chaos, the idea that our personal relationships can somehow make a positive impact on the world can feel kind of, well, not naive.
Yeah, I understand that skepticism, but what if we considered that conscious love isn't just about romantic relationships? What if it's a way of being in the world, a way of relating to ourselves, to others, and to life itself?
So it's bigger than just having a conscious relationship with a partner.
Much big. It's about cultivating those qualities of presence and compassion and awareness in all of our interactions. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness and understanding that our actions, no matter how small, have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves.
That reminds me of something Welwood said in one of the excerpts, that conscious couples can be the holders of the sacred in a world that's becoming increasingly secularized. What do you think he meant by that?
I think he's pointing to the potential for conscious relationships to be a source of healing and transformation, not just for the individuals involved, but for society as a whole. It's about reclaiming the sacred in our everyday lives, creating pockets of love and awareness that can inspire others.
It's not about, preaching or converting anyone, but simply living in a way that embodies those values.
Exactly. It's about letting our actions speak louder than words: authenticity, compassion, connection, presence. These are the building blocks of a more soulful and awakened world, and these qualities are cultivated in the crucible of conscious relationship.
Because it's in those intimate relationships that we're most challenged to face our limitations, to let go of our ego's defenses and open to something deeper.
Exactly. It's in the messiness of real relationships that we learn to practice forgiveness, to extend compassion, to hold space for another's pain. And as we do that work, we naturally become more loving and present, not just with our partners, but with everyone we encounter.
So our love expands to encompass a wider circle.
Yes. And that expanded love becomes a force for healing and transformation in the world. It might start small with our immediate relationships, but it has the potential to ripple outwards, creating a more just compassionate and interconnected world.
I love that vision, but how do we actually make that happen? It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, but what are some concrete steps we can take to bring more conscious love into the world?
Well, Welwood offers a few suggestions. He talks about the importance of creating rituals and practices that nurture our connection to the sacred.
Like setting aside time for meditation or contemplation or simply being in nature.
Exactly. These practices help us to cultivate inner peace and connect with a sense of something larger than ourselves. And that inner peace naturally radiates outwards, impacting the way we interact with others. And he also suggests bringing more consciousness to our daily interactions.
So just being more present with the people we encounter, listening deeply, speaking with kindness, act with integrity.
Yes, those might seem like small things, but they can have a profound impact. They shift the energy of our interactions and create a ripple effect that spreads outwards.
It's like those random acts of kindness that you hear about. They might seem insignificant in the moment, but they can have a huge impact on someone's day.
Exactly. And over time, those small acts of kindness add up. They create a web of connection and compassion that can lift us all up.
Welwood also encourages us to find ways to serve the forces of awakening in the world.
And that doesn't necessarily mean becoming a spiritual teacher or a guru. It's about finding our unique way to contribute to the collective good, using our gifts and talents to make the world a more beautiful and compassionate place.
So it could be through our work, our creative endeavors, or simply by being a loving and supportive presence in our communities.
Exactly. It's about aligning our actions with our values and finding ways to express our love in service to something larger than ourselves.
It's about being the change we want to see.
Yes. And it's about trusting that our individual efforts, when combined with the efforts of others, can create a powerful momentum towards a more awakened and harmonious world.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the nature of the fabricated self to the transformative power of conscious love.
And we've seen how our relationships can be a crucible for both personal and collective transformation.
It's been a rich and inspiring exploration, and I hope it's given you, dear listener, some valuable insights and inspiration for your own journey.
As we wrap up, I'd like to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
While world collapse can feel like a personal crisis,
It can also be an invitation to awaken to a deeper level of authenticity and connection.
a chance to discover the boundless love and wisdom that reside within us all.
May we all have the courage to embrace that journey and to create a world that reflects those qualities.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep awakening.